It's not often that we see cult leaders held to account for their bad behavior, and it is also rare to see a woman at the helm. But today, the cult we're talking about has both. A woman at the helm who doesn't just believe that God speaks through her, no, she believes that she is God. And she also doesn't believe in any form of modern medicine, which has led to deaths that 15 years later are finally being considered to be murder. So today we are going to look into His Way Spirit-Led Authorities, a cult out of California that is heading into trial with accusations of murder, abuse, and negligence. And today we are uncovering it all and hoping for justice. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post a video at least every single week on this channel, so if you like this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. Now, this case needs a bit of a trigger warning. There is the death of a young one, there is neglect, and it does get a little heavy. So I do want to make sure, if you are sensitive to any of that, please consider saving this video for a different time. It's one that I actually came upon late last year, maybe middle of last year, and I actually tried to draft out a deep dive. There just wasn't a lot of information, and this cult has been around for decades. So it's really just been kind of flying under the radar for way too long. But today we are exposing it all. So without further ado, let's jump right in. His Way Spirit-Led Assemblies didn't start in California. According to testimony from a former member named Bree Bird, it was founded in Nashville, Tennessee back in 1998. Around the year 2000, it would end up relocating to California, and then from roughly 2004 and on, it operated in the Inland Empire, which is that stretch of San Bernardino and Riverside counties that's kind of east of Los Angeles. And it's ironically, but also unironically, kind of near Hemet, which is where Gold Base is of Scientology. Now, what's really interesting about this particular cult and why it makes it so dangerous is that it was really easy to miss. It didn't look like a compound. There wasn't this gate, there wasn't a big sign, there wasn't anything that resembled a campus. His Way ran out of just regular residential houses with a bunch of members that would be living together under one roof in each home. I actually covered a case super similarly to this right here, where there was a cult basically within the same cul-de-sac, and it's incredibly creepy, and I highly recommend you listen. So from the street, His Way Spirit-Led Authorities looked just like a regular house. They had neighbors, there were cars in the driveway, people would leave for work in the morning because they did leave for work. This group ran a pest control company. According to the Redlands Police Department, it was called Full Shield Incorporated and would later operate under the name MaxGuard. The members would go out, do jobs, and earn the money. And I'm sure you're all guessing what happened to that money. Well, you got it. They did not get to keep it. That company and whatever happened to the money it made turns out to be one of the clearest windows into how this whole group actually functioned, because these were people essentially doing free labor to just grow the coffers of the church and its leader. This is essentially a church without any building. It's a congregation that all lives together, and it is a business that brings real income. So it's kind of running under the radar for a very long time. And at the center of it all is a woman who was telling her congregation that she was not a regular person anymore. and her name is Shelley Bailey Martin. She is 62 years old, but inside his way spirit-led authorities, according to prosecutors and former members, almost nobody used that name. They called her the Prophetess, Prophetess Cat, Prophetess Catherine. And her claims about herself are literally the foundation for everything else about this cult. According to Bree Bird, the former member who grew up in the group and would later testify in court, Shelley Martin didn't say she spoke to God. She said, God spoke as her, that she was the physical embodiment of the Holy Spirit. Bird testified that Martin compared herself to Neo from The Matrix, someone who had been pulled out of the false version of reality and was remade by God into a perfect being. Wow. These cult leaders just cannot come up with a single original thought on their own, can they? Like, I I can't stop thinking about this. Like, are these people, these groups, either just so insular that they aren't aware that there are thousands of people claiming the same thing all over the world? And how are you going to convince people that no, 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 all those people are lying? I'm the chosen one from God? Or do they know about all of these people and see how they're able to manipulate followers and basically get people to work for free for them and bow down to them? And they're using those same tactics intentionally? Or is it just this like illusion of grandeur that they almost can't even control and aren't even aware of? Because in my head, as someone who I think has a very strong and vast moral compass, I cannot fathom doing this type of thing to another human being, let alone several tens upon thousands of people like these cult leaders do. So in my head, I'm like, they can't know what they're doing because who in their right mind would do this to people? But then on the other side of the coin, I'm like, no, they have to know what they're doing because they're all using the same playbook. They're all using the same tactics. Or is it that they're all just such incensed narcissists and this is basically what all narcissists do? That those actually are all questions I have yet to answer, even though I've been studying these cults for over 3 years now. Anyways, back to this case. Sorry for the tangent. Now, Anthony Duran was another former member who would spend 3 years inside the cult but would get out in 2020. And he put it to CBS Los Angeles very simply. He said that members were told to not read the Bible on their own. The leaders would teach them what the Bible meant. And the main teacher was the prophetess, who Duran said claimed that she carried the Spirit so heavily that she could barely walk. In his own words, she was God. And here's the part that kind of tells you maybe it was just all performance, because Duran described what it looked like when Shelley Martin would channel God in front of the group. He said she would start shaking and convulsing, and her eyes would go wide, and then she would start speaking in what was like this fake British accent that was loud and grand and theatrical and completely different how she actually talked the rest of the time. Now, obviously, that sounds insane, but just kind of imagine that you are sitting in that room while it's happening. Now, if you truly believe this woman is God and she starts shaking and speaking in a voice that isn't hers, it might not be a red flag to you. It might be perceived as the most important thing you've ever witnessed. And also something I think we need to consider, which is actually very interesting when we talk about more Christian-based cults, cults that have leaders that say they are God. A lot of Christianity talks about a false prophet coming, but also B, the return of Jesus coming to save the chosen few. And different denominations obviously have different interpretations of the scripture. But I think that if you already have this foundation of Christianity and maybe you've grown up in the religion, you might be more open to the idea that this woman is God. And specifically, too, if you've never seen a woman at the helm being the bishop or the pastor, this might intrigue you even more. Like, oh, there's this empowered woman who is speaking as God. It's not something that you see every day in the patriarchal structure that really is most Christian religions. So, this woman would use distance to protect the illusion that she was creating. Duran would say that the prophetess wasn't allowed to be around ordinary membership. She was kept among what the group called the purest of the pure, and he believes that that's part of why the group kept multiple houses. It was basically a rank and file system so that those peons who didn't, work hard enough or pay enough to be a part of her group, they didn't even get access to her. And this invokes this feeling in members of fighting to be good enough. They want to become such a good congregant so that they gain access to someone. They want to become the inner circle because it almost starts to make you devalue yourself because your identity becomes attached to being a part of this group. But if the leader of the group doesn't want to acknowledge your existence, then there must be something that you're doing wrong. So it becomes this almost unspoken type of abuse that you're constantly fighting for the acknowledgement and appreciation of the leader. And then when you get a nugget of it, when you get an ounce of praise, it's fleeting, it's temporary. So you have to continuously fight for it over and over and over again. And that keeps you in the group longer, even if you start to see some red flags. Now, standing next to the prophetess was her husband, Daryl. Daryl Martin. Now he's 58, and inside the group, he went by Pastor Music. This pastor came across as gentle, humble, the soft face of the operation. The prophetess was the opposite. She was a dictator. He said that from the very first day he met her, she told him God was going to have his head. So you have that good versus cop kind of mentality. You have the warm one and then the frightening one working as a pair. And that combination is going to just keep people off balance. But that gentleness when someone feels doubt in the group is going to be that helping hand that keeps you inside. So, speaking of being inside the group, we have to try to understand how people end up here because nobody really joins a group like this on purpose. They think it's something else because it looks like something else. Now, Anthony Duran's family joined in 2017, and the reason was painfully ordinary. His mother wanted to reconnect with her brother, Anthony's uncle, a man named Raymond Duran, who was already a pastor in the church. That's it. A woman who was missing her brother. So, to actually become a member, you have to be saved. And this wasn't some kind of quiet prayer, it was an event run by the prophetess. So, during Duran's sister's saving, Shelley Martin began naming very private things about herself, people and events, things that she had done. Basically, a group confession. And this is a tactic I like to call collaborative collecting, where basically there's this idea that you're going to group share and you're going to confess to things to the group. And this is going to create a false sense of trust within the group. So you continue to open up about some of your more dark ideas, the things you've done in the past. And it's quote unquote a safe space so no one can judge you. But its real mechanism within the cult is so that the cult leader can collect collateral against you and then use it to their own advantage if you ever A, want to leave, or if you've provided them with something so egregious that they will threaten to expose you to the masses if you were to try to leave. So if, for example, you admitted to the group that you went no contact with your mother because you felt like she never listened to you and you had to leave because she was constantly trying to put her own ideas on you. And then you go to the cult leader or one of the higher ups in the group and you say, hey, like, I'm really feeling some red flags here. I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable with some of the things that we're doing. They're going to tell you, this sounds like your pattern in your childhood trauma. It sounds like you run away just like you ran away from your mother when things get hard. So you see how it creates this cycle of people staying inside something that they don't actually want to stay inside of because they're going to think it means that they are not growing quick enough. So after these confessions, Anthony says that he just threw his hands up towards the sky And one of the leaders came over and started praying over him, shouting, "Fire," and speaking in tongues. And Duran said that he felt what he could only really describe as like electricity running through his bones. And then he just broke down crying uncontrollably. And this type of pain on another person's behalf and knowing that the people you're sharing your deepest, darkest secrets with are feeling and sharing pain with you and are wanting to connect with you and are forgiving you for things that you feel shame for doing, that's going to make you feel instantly connected to them. It's going to make the person at the center of it all feel like this is now their chosen family, and people outside of the group just are never going to understand. Now, underneath all of this was a deadline, as we've seen in many cults. Members were taught that the end of the world was coming, and that obedience to the prophetess was how you survived that ending. Apparently, the prophetess would say, "God is going to take me, and anybody that has obeyed me and obeyed him will come with." So you basically had to follow whatever rule that this woman made, otherwise you were essentially not going to go to heaven. So that's just another reason to keep you invested in the group. So what does it look like day to day inside this compound? Now, if you were lucky enough to join the main compound called the Swarthmore house, you were put to work immediately. You are pulled out of school, you are put on the group's construction or pest control crews, and you work for that company full shield. You don't have a diploma, you don't have a choice in the matter, you just get to work. And obviously, when we think of those kinds of industries, the work's going to be brutal. It's going to be hard labor. Duran would say he would put in up to 17 hours a day and was paid about $12 an hour. But he wasn't allowed to cash those checks that he was given. Because sometimes God says that you're not getting paid and then you're not getting paid. You just got this symbolistic check handed to you that made you think you were getting paid for the work that you were doing, but it literally just stayed in the cult's bank because, well, no, you can't go spend it. God says you can't spend it, but this is still your money, but you can't spend it. It can't go into your bank, okay? And if you did get to see that income, it was really just an allowance because only the pastors got the actual money. Additionally, members had to pull security shifts at the Swarthmore house around the clock. Someone always had to be on duty patrolling this very large property, and they would watch up from the trees. There were apparently these crow's nests built up in the trees, and members would just sit up there and keep watch. Now, at first, the people on guard would be armed with a compound bow or high-powered airsoft gun, but then, one day, that all changed, and they were allowed to carry real guns. And as for the conditions inside, Duran said the living spaces were unclean and that members regularly went without basic necessities like toiletries. Very simple stuff. So you have a house full of people who have pulled themselves out of their career or their school. They're working themselves to exhaustion and not getting actually paid. They're standing guard all night at this compound because the woman at the helm of it has instilled this fear in them that the government will come after them. And then you also don't get toilet paper. That feels crazy. So, of course, the next question on everybody's lips is, well, then why didn't people just leave? But the whole design of a group like this is to make leaving feel impossible. And his way had a specific tactic for every exit someone might try to go through. So, according to past members, leaders made members cut off all their family and friends who weren't in the church. And they didn't just forbid that contact, they poisoned it. Duran said that leaders would deliver a warning straight from God through the prophetess that a member's own family was plotting to come steal them away from the church. So, your mother wasn't calling to check in on you to see how you were because she loved you. It was actually a threat against the group, and the group had to defend against it. They had to protect the home. Secondly, they took any kind of medical intervention completely off the table. Multiple former members say the group didn't believe in the medical system. Getting sick or hurt was treated as a failure of your own faith and evidence that you weren't right with God. Of course, we're going to guilt someone for getting sick. The prescription was never a doctor, it was just to pray more. Now, when a group treats medicine as lack of faith, the people who pay for it are the ones with the least power to argue: the sick, the elderly, and the children. And also, they're obviously controlling your body and your time. Duran would say that members were sometimes made to fast or even ordered to stay home and do nothing but eat, sleep, and pray. They were not allowed to center their lives around anything but God. So when someone else is deciding when you do all of these things, you're completely losing your own autonomy. And then you stop believing that you even deserve that autonomy. They also separated any family units within the church. So parents would be taken away from their own children, and the children would be raised by church elders. Young girls were pushed into marriages with much older men, and it's justified the same way everything is justified in a group like this. Well, this is what God told us. So when you can rearrange who a child belongs to and who a young woman marries, you literally own the next generation before it can even think about questioning you. And then, for anyone who really wanted to leave, there was a high price. Now, the group would claim it was a welcome to leave policy, but in practice, members were strongly discouraged from going, and that some people were even beaten in front of the entire ministry to dare say out loud that they wanted out. So you would learn by watching, by example. So if you wanted to leave, you knew you would just get hurt. And as for Duran, he had to get out by escaping in the middle of the night. And he said that multiple members escaped the same way, just in the dark quietly. And the punishment for leaving would follow ex-members out the door. Family members will cut you off completely. They will block you everywhere. Now, when he told his mother later that he was going to have a baby, he said that she told him she didn't want to see him or that demon child. Yeah, that is how they strip away the family unit. Now I want to talk about another former member named Bree Bird. Now, Bird grew up inside the group, and she said that she was beaten regularly. She said that she was locked away, sometimes for long stretches, because she knew what was happening to all of them was wrong. She described living on roughly one piece of bread and one glass of water for 2 or 3 months at a time until she was down to about 90 pounds. She said she would be left in a single sanitary pad for that entire month. She described being beaten with a belt while blindfolded and at one point handcuffed to a bed. And she said that when she told the prophetess that she was being essayed, Shelley Martin punched her in the face and called her a liar. Bird said that she was finally able to escape at 15. This is literally a child's account of what this group did to her. And it is partly her testimony and her being brave enough to speak out that allows for justice to begin to be served now. So, what is going on now? All of this would culminate in tragedy in January of 2010 when a 4-year-old boy passed away. His name was Timothy Thomas, but everyone called him Timo. In January of 2010, Timo was living in a home in Colton where members of his way lived together. His parents had placed him in the care of the Martins. Timo's father, a man named Andre Thomas, was himself a member of the group. He's now 49, and he is one of the people charged in his own son's death. So this isn't stories of strangers taking a child. It's literally a story of a father who was so deep inside this system that he did nothing to protect his son. So here's what prosecutors have laid out in court about what happened that January. Timo got sick. Apparently, he had appendicitis. His appendix was so inflamed that if not treated, it would erupt and it would become life-threatening very fast. But it's also one of the most routine medical emergencies in the field. I mean, appendicitis is something that emergency rooms handle every single day. So a child who gets to the hospital in time almost always ends up being fine. But, as I'm sure you guessed, Timo did not get to a hospital. The prosecutor on the case, a deputy district attorney named Justin Crocker, told the court that the little boy showed clear signs of serious illness. He was lethargic, and something was obviously and visibly wrong. And here's the specific allegation the prosecution has made, and it goes to the heart of everything we've talked about so far. Crocker told the court that the Martins did not believe in modern medicine, and that they instructed the church members living with Timo in that Colton home to not take him to a hospital, but to pray for him instead. The adults, the prosecutors, all allege that they followed that instruction, that this little boy's appendix would rupture, and he would die of a fully avoidable situation if these people had just trusted in modern medicine. But for 15 years, nobody was charged. The case would just sit there. And you're probably wondering, okay, why did this take so long? There was probably plenty of evidence to point that no medical intervention was sought out. It would be negligence at least. But according to the Colton Police Department, when Timo died in 2010, investigators talked to members of the group and they didn't get the truth. It was this closed world, and the people inside it either wouldn't or maybe couldn't be honest with the police. So it took years and former members finally getting out, finding the courage to talk, and then the detectives were able to piece things together. But if you thought that was the only death in this group, you would be incorrect, because the second death takes us forward 13 years, and it starts with something that in this group was incredibly dangerous to do. A man decided to leave. His name was Emilio, and he was 40 years old. And according to the Los Angeles Times, Emilio had been connected to his way for a very long time, close to 2 decades. He had worked in the pest control business that the group ran. And in April of 2023, he did the thing that's almost impossible to do in a group like this. He got out, he left California, and he moved back home to Nashville, close to his family, and he would start his own pest control company. It was a brand new start with a legitimate business. He was living his own independent life. But a month later, in May of 2023, Emilio would return to the Inland Empire. According to his sister Jennifer, who spoke to the LA Times, he returned to try to reconnect with some of his former pest control clients for his new company. And that, prosecutors and police say, is where the trouble started. Because His Way allegedly saw a former member now running his own version of their business and talking to their customers as a threat. According to the Redlands Police Department, this became a business dispute. And on May 8th, 2023, Emilio was served with a cease and desist letter telling him to stop. Now, prosecutors have described the motive in his death in a single word: greed. Because he never made it back home. Emilio was last seen on May 25th, 2023, at a Starbucks on Redlands Boulevard in Redlands. The truck he was driving, a rented Nissan Frontier, was picked up on surveillance video that same day in the nearby city of Grand Terrace. And then he disappeared. His family would report him missing, and for about 2 years, that's what this case was, a missing persons case. No body, no answers. But then, in 2025, that rented truck was found. It was in the Mojave Desert, and it had been burned. Investigators would recover a lot of evidence there, but there was unfortunately no sign of Emilio. And at that point, the case changed from a disappearance to a homicide. And to this day, his body has never been found. In August 2025, as part of the investigation, Redlands detectives and other agencies served a search warrant at a remote home in Anza, in the desolate stretch well east of Temecula. Apparently, 8 people at that home were briefly detained and then released. Exactly what evidence prosecutors have that ties the killing to any specific person is something that we just don't know yet. But for this death, 3 people have been charged: the Prophetess, Shelley Martin, and also a former member and pastor named Ruben Moreno. Now, this is different than Anthony Duran, who we have heard a lot from in this video. Ruben Moreno was arrested separately in Nashville this year in January. But if you thought we were getting close to finally figuring out what the next steps are in this case, you would be wrong, because a third person is missing in this story. His name is Ruben Moreno, and he vanished in 2019. According to police, he was last seen at a home in Claremont that he shared with other members of his Way Spirit led assemblies. And here's what ties him straight back to this case. Ruben Moreno is the brother of Rudy Moreno, who is one of the men who are now charged in Emilio's murder. And Anthony Duran knew Ruben. He described him to CBS as an elder of the church, and he said that the leaders kept Ruben, in his words, on missions or in prayer. Duran said Ruben would surface every now and then, say hello, but then he would disappear back into some room, the door would lock, and then that was the last you'd ever see of him for a while. But then, one day, Ruben simply stopped coming around at all. And when members asked, Duran said that they were told that he was on some special secret mission from God. The leaders would also just ignore the questions completely. So as of now, no one's been arrested or charged in this disappearance. That case is still open. Police are still investigating it, and there have been no public updates. So I really don't want to speculate about what happened to him here. But let's think about all the evidence we do have. We have Emilio, we have Timo, and we have Ruben. 3 people, either dead or missing, all coming from one group. And at some point, the police realized that they all had to be connected somehow. And it was cooperation that finally brought it all down. Once the departments connected the dots, the investigation would grow. The California Department of Justice got involved, all the way up to the state attorney general, Rob Bonta, whose special operations unit joined the Emilio case. But what actually made a difference wasn't just police work, it was people talking. The break in Timo's case came from former members, people who back in 2010 had been too frightened to tell the truth, and who now, years later, once they were out and safe, finally felt brave enough to speak out. The people who got away are the reason there's a case at all. It just goes to show that you can make a difference if you are being victimized by a person or a group and you are brave enough to speak out. You truly can make a difference. So on December 11th, 2025, a joint operation happened involving the Redlands, Colton, and Riverside County law enforcements, along with the California DOJ. They all moved in on those locations in Hemet and Colton. According to KTLA, 6 members of the group were arrested that day, and 4 of them were charged with murder. The 2 Martins, longtime member Rudy Moreno, and a man named Andre Thomas. Now, others were arrested on weapons charges tied to the firearms around the investigation. And there was a 5th murder defendant who wasn't there that day, Raymond Duran. He was arrested about a month later in Nashville. Now, when they made the arrests, they brought victim advocates and a crisis response dog to the scene to try to help the members of the group with food, water, and resources. And obviously, this is not standard for a normal arrest. That's what you bring when you know people inside have been controlled and are going to need help just to stand on their own 2 feet. And I think the more we understand cults and cult tactics, law enforcement will hopefully be able to provide that help to survivors. Now, the district attorney would file charges, murder, and in some cases, conspiracy to commit murder. And the DA's office did something notable in how they described the group publicly. They didn't call it a church. They called it a religious high control group, which is really rare to hear at the onset of a case. We see a lot of law enforcement kind of misunderstand coercive control and sometimes fail to name the thing that is the cause of all this heartbreak and tragedy and chaos. So I'm really happy that we're actually naming something. It might not be called a cult yet. I think the word cult has been thrown around so often over the last probably 5 years that its meaning has been diminished. But saying it's a religious high control group does carry more weight in a situation like this. If you're not going to say the word cult, at least you're saying religious high control group, which is essentially what a cult is, but a cult obviously doesn't necessarily have to be religious. Anyways, let's jump to where we are now. Over the first half of 2026, the case went through a preliminary hearing. Prosecutor Justin Crocker told the court that one word explained the whole case: control. And the defense would push back hard, especially on Timo's death, with the argument that it was a terrible mistake and not the same thing as murder. But at the start of July 2026, Judge Colin Belash ruled that there is enough evidence for all of it to move forward. The defendants were held to answer on murder charges, which means that this case is going to trial. So here's exactly where things stand right now. 5 people, including the woman her followers call the Prophetess and her pastor husband, are headed toward a murder trial in San Bernardino County. All of them have pleaded not guilty, and all of them are presumed innocent, and everything prosecutors have said still has to be proven to a jury. The next court date is coming up very shortly, so I will be updating as things progress. Now, that other disappearance, Ruben Moreno, is still unsolved, and Emilio has still never been found. We will see if things culminate in a trial regarding those 2 cases a bit later. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this case unfolds. I love it when cults and cult leaders are held to account, but it is still so heartbreaking that it's taken, in some cases, in poor Timo's case, 15 years to even begin to get justice. And that's just so heartbreaking. But I also think that there is satisfaction in knowing that these people thought they'd gotten away with it. And almost 2 decades later, a decade and a half later, they're realizing that, well, they didn't. So hopefully we will see justice in this situation. And every single cult leader who goes to trial just sets the precedent for the next one after them. So I really, really hope that the court system can gain a better understanding of coercive control and hold these people to account to give justice to those brave members for speaking out, but also for the people who have been killed or killed by neglect or have been missing. Because if there's already a couple deaths in this roster of bad news from this cult and there are still people missing, that just leads me to believe that there's more darkness. So, anyways, guys, I want to say thank you for staying with me through this hard one. I know it's not always easy, but I appreciate you sticking around for it. I'd really love to hear your comments on this one. I am curious about what you think about all this, if you've been following this, and if you want me to continue following it. Maybe it's something that I can react to the trial. We can watch the trial live together. That could be a good thing. And really, really try to understand the lawyer's tactics and see if we decide or we think they are using the right language and the right tools to really, really emphasize the coercive nature of this group and provide justice to the families. So I want to say thank you all so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time and attention. Stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Bye.